Hi, this is Chris Gehringer from Sterling Sound. You're listening to My Weekly Mixtape with Brian Colburn.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Joining me tonight is Chris Gehringer, a senior engineer and partner at Sterling Sound. Chris has mastered countless albums that are staples of my collection, including titles like Wu-Tang Clan's Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers, Naughty by Nature's 1991 self-titled album, as well as albums for modern chart toppers like Rihanna, Lady Gaga, Dua Lipa, and many, many others. The songs and albums that Chris has mastered have racked up over 20 Grammy Award nominations and counting. It's needless to say, Chris, that it's an absolute honor to have you on the show this evening.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get started, I always like to ask my first-time guests, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
So I'm old, so I know what a mixtape is. I used to make mixtapes. A mixtape to me it's a person exposing their favorite music, like their taste in music, a message that they want to give, and making a tape for someone. When you make a mixtape for someone, you want someone to know who you really are and what you love. And, whether you're giving it to a significant other or a friend or for a party, mixtapes like back in the day were really important. Like when you came to a party with a mixtape, everybody was listening and everybody knew whose mixtape it was. So it was a very important thing. I've made a ton of mixtapes in my day.
Now, tonight's episode's a bit of a different animal for My Weekly Mixtape, as the conversation here is usually centered around bands and songs. And while we're still technically centering this episode around that, instead of talking about the songs themselves, tonight we're going to be digging into the actual sound of the songs. And then we're going to take a look at where the Loudness War stand now and where it might even be headed in the future. Now, Chris, in case that last sentence made any of my listeners' heads start spinning, could you maybe start by providing a top-level 101 definition about what mastering actually is?
Mastering is the last creative step in the music making process. It's like Photoshop for audio. You take what's been recorded and produced and mixed already, and then we go through it with it's a third person's take on what we did. You listen to it and you say, oh, that song sounds great, but it sounds dull in my room, or that song sounds lower compared to the other songs. That song sounds too bright or too aggressive. And what we do in mastering is we reshape those songs to match the overall flow of an album. For singles, you would treat each song as its own, flower with its own look and own smell. But for an album, we kind of try and put it all together. I mean, we used to back in the day. Today, everybody is living in the single world. So there's a different approach in mastering, but it's basically taking each song and making it sound as best as it possibly can through EQs and limiters and compressors, different pieces of gear that we do that with.
So then kind of focusing on the album side of things here, because I know there are a lot of people that listen to this show that are big into the album listens. How do you take mastering into consideration when an album has been recorded with different producers at different studios? Because especially in modern times, you have artists recording everywhere from major high-end studios to bedrooms and pretty much everywhere in between.
Exactly. So let me just go back in the day. An album was generally recorded by one or two people and mixed by one person, pretty much, a full album. Today, like you said, I work on a pop record. It's got 9 producers, 13 mixers, all different things that now we have to try and tie the whole thing together so it sounds like a cohesive album. So it sounds like one piece of art from one artist as opposed to 13 different sounds. I personally like when an album sounds like an album. Today, some of the younger people don't really care. They don't really listen to albums or never have listened to albums. And they're all about their song on that person's album. So I use some of my old school mentality to work, and then I use some of my kind of modern day, what would I do in this situation on the project as well. But it's tying everything together. It's going through it. When you have that many producers and engineers, it makes it much more difficult to find that common ground, because you feel like sometimes you're taking away from some songs to make them match, or adding too much to make it match. That's where the master engineer comes in with his or her expertise and knowledge of, this is what I would do in this situation. And in my room, it sounds perfect, or it sounds the best it can be. And rooms are very important in mastering as well. That's your everyday piece of gear, is the room, not an EQ or a limiter or a workstation. It's the room itself where you get your sound from, and you become confident in your sound and know your sound. So very important kind of thing to have.
Well, I want to touch on something you said there, because you talked about the old school mentality that you have. Now, you're an engineer who navigated the waters between the transition of analog tape to digital files. So let's use Wu-Tang Clan's 36 chambers versus Dua Lipa's Radical Optimism for an example here. I understand that the fundamental nature of mastering is going to be there no matter what the format.
True.
But were there nuances that you had to take into consideration when you were mastering on tape versus now in the digital realm?
Yes, actually the Wu-Tang, so funny story, it all came in on digital tape when it first came in, the album. And I worked on the album in the digital realm. I mean, with analog gears, but back into digital. But then as they did the singles, they remixed it all to tape, because I feel like some of the better mixers at the time were working still in half-inch tape, and that's what they did. So a lot of the singles of the Wu-Tang's album are different mixes than what's on the album, and that was kind of a common thing back in the day. Today, it's pretty much like, it's digital file, and the digital file goes everywhere, single, album, cut, whatever. Working in that on like the Wu-Tang, it was a much longer process. Everything was done in real time. Dua Lipa today, the files are sent to me from, like Josh Goodwin mixed most of it. He sends me the files from LA to New Jersey. I, log into my computer, I pull the files down, I put them up, and I just start working on it. Back when I did the Wu-Tang, they came in, they had tapes. We had to do a lot of editing, like a lot of assembly for the album. All those kung fu skits and the speaking pieces, the interludes, were taken from other tapes. We actually recorded off of VHS in my lounge at the studio, some of the kung fu skits. We ran wires from the lounge all the way into my room, into the converters, and RZA played watching TV in the lounge. We had a giant screen, old box, like rear projector TV. Playing the kung fu skits, and he was like, all right. And I was like, ready. We'd yell across the studio, okay, hit it. And he'd play the skit, and I'd record it, and then I'd edit it into the album and stuff like that. But he had to watch some of it and know which pieces, and it was just way different. Today, nobody does that. Everybody has everything done digitally on files, and everybody sends it. Nobody's recording last minute like back then. We used to do back in the day, we would do a lot of interludes and skits live in the studio. Someone would be like, just get me a mic and I'm going to say something. And you're like, okay. Today you'd be like, get out of here. I can't do that. Yeah, it's too much. But, back in the day, there was much more analog involvement in making everything. Everything today is pretty much, like you said, people are recording vocals, in hotel rooms, buses, green rooms at TV shows, like the weirdest places you heard somebody did a vocal track or fix something. Yeah, back in the day, it was much more like you really prepared for mastering, you really finished your album, everything was kind of done except for maybe the interludes, and then you showed up. Today, everything's pretty much done in production. A singer just sings over a completed track, and that's it. It's kind of crazy today.
Now, is that something that you notice when you're doing a mastering session, where you can kind of almost turn to the artist and say, I could kind of hear nuances of a reverb that doesn't sound traditional. Are you sure you want to keep pushing for? Have you ever sent files back to the artist to say something's not sounding right here?
So that is the question of the day. That beats all questions. Is it my place to tell the artist this is just bad? because by the time it gets to me, it's gone through the label, the producer, the mixer, and everybody's kind of somewhat signed off on. I don't know if that's like the full extent of when it gets to me. A lot of times it's like, get it to mastering, we'll make decisions later. But I feel like sometimes sometimes I would like to tell, the artist or the mixer, hey, this could use a little more love, or, maybe give this another look at, before we sign off on it here in mastering. Sometimes there's things that just, somebody's rushed, or the sample wasn't really good, or there's something in the song that's not really good and they have no time to fix it, or they can't fix it.
Now, as somebody who's been mastering for as long as you have, do you have certain albums that you look to as quote unquote shining examples of mastering perfection, something you show clients as a benchmark for where you'd like to take their album, or does that change from project to project?
For me, it changes from project to project. I do a really broad section of music when I master. I do like a lot of K-pop, I do a lot of pop, I do reggae, I do, rock, I do metal, I do stuff all over the place. So my day is not really like, it's not like I could put up a favorite album of mine in the morning and then kind of go through the day vibing off of that.
Right.
Because of what I do is so varied, and in the digital world today, like back in the day, you were limited to how much work you could do because of the real-time work and setup. Today, I have an assistant do all my setups, and he basically just sets up files in my computer. So I just open up the files and they're there and it's set up and I start working. I don't have to align a tape machine or wind tapes on and off and things like that. It's much more intense, much more work today because of that. But I do, every now and then I do listen to some references. If somebody mentions something, I'll sit and listen to what they're talking about to kind of get a color idea or, a direction. And then I put their music up and see if it even is close or, has anything to do with their references. And then I go from there. I feel a lot of times people's references today are just like, this is a hit song you did 2 years ago and I really like it. Can you make me like that? It's like, the reference doesn't work like that.
Right.
A reference to me is like, this is kind of like the song that we're thinking we're like, like this is the vibe of the song, the level, the color, the transients, all the things that have to do with audio is what I take into account when somebody gives me a reference. Not is it a hit, but generally people just give me hit songs as references. Nobody's giving me some obscure track from 1993 that I did a hip hop record where they're like, this is the vibe, like it's always Dua Lipa or Rihanna or Lady Gaga or so, it's big records. It's never, the obscure thing. And every now and then I get something a little weird and I'm like, okay, this guy really means for me to make it sound like that, as opposed to make it sound like a hit record or, a big star. That to me is just like, okay, everybody wants that. Nobody's bringing me tapes or files and saying like, just, whatever, do whatever you feel, like you kind of like make it, do your best work, so.
Of course. Now, the Loudness Wars crept up, maybe for me at least, almost out of nowhere. And if I think back, I'd say it started to really become prominent around the same time that iTunes shot into popularity. Sure. As somebody who works with mastering albums all the time, did it seem as immediate to you, or did you hear the tides changing during that time period?
So this is going to be a little history moment here. The Loudness Wars for mastering engineers have basically been since the 80s, maybe even before that. Radio stations play your music basically back in the day. It was set on one level. An engineer set it and you couldn't go past there, you'd blow the system. So whatever the radio station played at, they never really adjusted the level. So whatever the records came in at, if the records were loud, they played louder. If the records were low, they played at that level. And the louder records hit the radio compressors a little better and kind of gave it some oomph that maybe it was missing. So people started realizing the louder I deliver a record to radio, the better it sounds on radio. So the Loudness War kind of created then, and it also happened in clubs with DJs. So DJs would always set their volume on 10, and the records were the mix levels. And the louder your record was for the DJ, the louder it played in the club. So if they were playing everything on 10, if your record was 10, it played at 10. If the next guy's record was 7, his record played a little lower, and people are like, oh, okay. You know, it was all reactionary to level. We go through vinyl, the whole thing, the louder the vinyl, the better for radio. Cassettes kind of nullified all that. CDs came into play, and then it was more about not having noise, record noise, like the ground floor of the record. And then it kind of switched to people loading up CD players, and the louder CDs sounded better. And the louder CDs played louder on the radio for whatever reason, you know, the same thing. So everybody started getting into make my CD the loudest again, and kind of push the boundaries of digital audio back then. So now fast forward into playlists, and here we are again with the same scenario. If my song sounds the loudest on the playlist, I feel like it stands out more. And I mean, if you take a bottle of hot sauce and dump it on one portion of your dinner, whatever that is going to be the one where you're like, damn, that was hot and whatever. Is it better? I don't know, but you'll remember that one as being the hottest plate. So the same thing with the songs. If it plays louder, some people feel like, oh, it's louder, so it's better. There's kind of this thing too about most people don't notice a level change until it's 3 dB. They don't notice 1 dB or 2 dBs. They notice 3 dB, the average person. So if your record is 3 dB louder than somebody else, you notice it as apparently louder. And that's what everybody's looking for. The louder, the better. It's kind of like stupid and doesn't really make sense to actually being true. So as much as I hate the Loudness Wars, I hate that name, I hate the whole thing involved with it, it's really true, and people really want a louder record. So there is a war over who has the loudest record. And it's never going to end. It's going to be there. It's how do we as mastering engineers navigate that through every genre of medium, like from records to CDs to streaming now. I don't know if there's ever going to be anything different than streaming going forward. Like what could there be? You know, radio waves in your head. I don't, you know, I don't know where we're going with that, but someone's going to want to make that louder in your head. You know what I'm saying? So going forward, the Loudness War is never going to end. That's what I kind of came here to say today. It's annoying, but it's never going to end, and it's real, and everybody is going to have to deal with it going forward. Yes, music sounds better when it's not pushed to the max. And that is something that a master engineer can generally tell you, like, okay, you know, if we're here and it sounds good to everybody, and then the producer, whoever wants it to be here because it sounds better in a playlist, that difference could be a couple dB, and it could be a game changer for like the vibe and the feeling and the space and the transience and the movement of the record by squeezing it that much more. So that's the part as a master engineer, and all master engineers hate to go through. And it's like, if it was just this level, it would sound so amazing. Like it blows my mind in my room and the whole thing. And when you push it too much, everything just gets kind of in your face and it loses the vibe. That's the part I wish I could really explain to people and really guide people in audio. But everybody lives by the thing. If it's louder, it's better. So it's hard to change. We have to change everybody to get that to work. If one person stands out, it's the same way it started in the beginning. One person said, if my record's louder, it's better, you know? So it's never going to change. Whew, I said that.
Well, it's fascinating you bring that up because I want to play a short clip. I did an interview recently with Eric Bass of Shinedown, and his studio album, I Had a Name, was mastered by Ted Jensen over at Sterling Sound.
Yeah.
And he talked about that. I'd like to play that because I feel like you and him are on the same page here. Let's take a listen.
Sure.
Thank you to Ted Jensen, the legendary Ted Jensen, mastering engineer at Sterling Sound, because he masters all of Shinedown's records and all of my records, and anything I work on, I have him master. And believe me, man, it's something I have to come to terms with when I listen back to a mastered record that I made, which is, this is not going to be as loud as everybody else's record, probably, like comparatively. You know, it's just not. But there's a volume knob there, and if you turn it up 3 clicks, 3 dB, whatever that is, then it will be as loud as everybody else's record, and it'll have dynamics. And so that is a conscious thing I do. I realized that I have to give up some loudness shock value in that Like everybody wants a loud record, man. I want a loud record. I want a really loud record. I want the loudest record out there. Everybody does. But you can't have it both ways.
Is Eric's approach in 2025 a refreshing exception to the rule?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And every now and then I feel like some people get it when they hear it the right way. Hardly anybody comes to mastering. Ever since COVID, people went out and, they went to Sweetwater and they bought, every piece of gear for home studio for COVID. And now everybody just stays at home. Like even big artists, just like, oh, I'll listen to it in my studio at home. I know the speakers. And they miss out on this, what I have here, which is like, it's a room designed for audio. It's not some speakers with some diffusers somewhere. The entire room is set up for the pristine, perfect audio listening environment. And if they got to hear what I hear here, they would maybe have a different approach, or they'd have a different thought about making it loud in the end and hearing the difference between it being crushed here and being dynamic and open here and the right level. But we need people to come in again. Next week, I have 2 really big artists coming in, 2 separate projects. And I'm excited that they're coming in because they're going to hear the stuff here and know what I'm hearing. And there's less dialogue involved. There's less guessing involved. It's like, I look at them and I watch them be like, if they're like listening and they're like vibing and like whatever, then I'm taking that energy as like, okay, this is good. If they're like going like this, I know we're going to have to make some changes. So it's an instant revision note, as they say. It's like the revision's going on right now. Where if it goes back and forth, you never really know what someone's listening to it on. I have giant ATC monitors in here. If they're listening on headphones, it's a different vibe. If they're only going to listen on headphones, that's a different vibe. If they're going to listen on small speakers, that's a different, there's just so many things. What I wish a lot of clients would do, and artists would do, is trust the process and the engineer. Like this is not some home thing here. This is a real studio with, real engineers put this together, architects and electricians and, mad scientists put this all together for a good reason. So it's just getting them to that point.
Well, as a listener, for me, there is loud songs like we've talked about, but then there's brickwalled songs. And I've used that term with casual music fans, and I've kind of received some raised eyebrows over the years. Can you talk about what brickwalling is and what it means for you, besides headaches, as a mastering engineer?
So let me just say first, the headache part is because you can't do anything. Brickwalling is where somebody raises the level of the audio so high that when you actually turn the knobs, you don't really hear what would normally happen on a normal level record. You hear distortion, or you hear really broad EQ changes, or EQ changes that don't even sound like what would normally happen because the level is so loud going through the circuits and pushing everything. And that's because people want the record, they want this thing happening. And I get some of it. So I've done records that were, -2 LUFS, which is like almost completely destroyed. And it worked for their genre of music. It worked for what they were doing. Was I happy working on it? I'm going to say no. Like, it's not something I really like to do, is I feel like I'm only using one hand when I'm working on it, like I'm only using one ear because I'm so limited in what I can do. When a song is lower and has a lot of movement to it, I can make it tighter. I can make it in your face if you want, or I can relax it and keep it nice and loose and have that spatial feeling around it. When you get the brick wall, you can't undo that. You can't undo that and put space back in and uncrush it. So there's only one direction to go in, and that's more, like it's more, it's like, what do you do? Like it's so limited, like I said, it's going back to, like, imagine, eating something that's got so much hot sauce on it. You can't, like, what do you do? Pour milk on it to, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't undo it. So you just have to eat it that way and deal with it that way. It's always going to be that one note of like loud and distorted, and that's it. And some people like that. the part about the loudness wars that I feel like in the beginning I didn't get, and now I get. And that's what it is. Some people like that stuff. Some people think that's artistically, what they want.
Well, an album immediately comes to mind for me when you say that, at least in terms of Brickwalling and the Loudness Wars, and that's Metallica's Death Magnetic, which Ted Jensen over at Sterling Sound mastered. However, he's gone on record saying that the mixes were already brickwalled before even arriving at Sterling. Is that something that's become the norm, or is that a more extreme exception to this rule?
No, I would say a lot of the content that comes in now, a lot of the files that come in are brick-walled before we get them.
Wow.
I don't know many master engineers, I mean, good ones or like people that work in a real room that would intentionally brick wall something to just impress somebody and say, look at the level I got you. Maybe 10 years ago, people would do stuff like that, but not in today's world. Like I would consider that like just an amateur move if somebody did that. But mix wise, a lot of times the producers write these songs and when they're writing them and creating them, they're A/Bing against other songs that are already mastered or released. So they're dragging their production level up to that level of a mastered project. And that's where they're creating their sounds and all their stuff. And then they hand it off to a mixer. And if the mixer lowers that, then the producer is going to be like, hey, that's what I want. Like that's where I've been working. So mixers now stuck saying, okay, I have to mix this at -3 LUFS or 4 LUFS or whatever. Even 6 or 7 LUFS to mix at is loud. You're really pushing the boundaries of, modern equipment. And it's like, I work every day with plugins, and a lot of these plugins aren't really set up to go that loud. You're really pushing all the parameters of these plugins and analog gear for sure. So it's kind of like, they're stuck there. Everybody's stuck there. Once the producer says, this is where I am, we're all stuck there, or the writer or the artist or whoever. We can't undo that in a lot of cases. If you guys like guys like Shinedown going in saying, we're going to make this with space and movement and all that. Love that, because there's always an option to go louder. When it's too loud, there's no option to undo that.
Right.
And that's where it's kind of like, ugh. I work on some projects where they're so loud and so distorted that I'm not necessarily like I'm not doing a lot to it. So I don't really want like a full association with like, oh, this is my genre or this is my thing. Or people listen to it and go, man, Chris really cranked the hell out of that. It's like, no, I didn't, like you get a little bit of a bad rep when stuff is really loud like that. If it's a hit record, nobody gives a shit. Everybody's
Right.
like, oh my God, it's so good. And I really laugh at times when people like, a really loud crushed record becomes a hit. And everybody's like, man, that sounds so good. It's so like whatever. And it's like, no, you like the song. It doesn't really sound that good, but you like the song. And all the magic works, and I get that part. But as far as mixing or mastering, it's not really that good. So let me wind back to Metallica, which is funny, like, I guess 15 years ago, we couldn't talk about this because it was like a whole thing. And I think Rick Rubin produced that.
Yes.
And, there was like, he was doing a lot of stuff loud. He was one of the first guys who was doing stuff really loud. And I'm a huge fan of Rick. Like a lot of his production, he did a Tom Petty album that I think is one of it's one of Tom Petty's best albums, and I'm a total fan, but I kind of feel like that level might not have been necessary for that record at that time. And Ted got a lot of shit for it. And when he said he didn't do it, Rick and everybody else got pissed off saying like, oh, you threw us under the bus or whatever they want to call it or whatever they want to say. And I don't think Ted meant to do that in any way, but it happened. It was one of the first records that people were like, wow, this is really loud and distorted. And it's not what, it wasn't at the loud level that everybody accepted. It went past that. So, a lot of people shunned it. And now today you would laugh. You'd be like, okay, that's just an average sound level record,
Exactly.
Because we've worked our way up to that point now.
Now, were there any genres that you feel are more comfortable in the loud space versus others? Because like you said, Shinedown is a rock band and they're trying to kind of have some more atmosphere and space. Do you ever deal with a pop or a hip hop artist that comes in and says, you know what? We want space. We want room to breathe at the top.
I've been getting more and more of that. It's kind of weird. I do everything. I always give the client back the level that I feel like, okay, this is your genre. These are your, the people that you're going to be against or whatever in the same realm or the same playlist. And I kind of try and put them in that same level area. And I've been getting a lot of people lately saying, hey, could you lower that a little? It doesn't need to be that loud. And I'm like, sure, it's going to change a little. It's going to get a little better, I think. But, I'm really getting into lowering stuff. And it's kind of funny every time I get one where they're like lowered, I kind of feel like, oh, wow, maybe they think I'm like that loud guy, it's like, I don't want to be the loud guy. I want to be the good guy. Let me go, but it's hard without anybody coming in, and a lot of stuff I do, it's like, even a phone call can explain until I hear it, until I work on it and, bounce it off somebody. It's all this like kind of give and take thing. But, I do my thing, you listen to it, you give me your thing back. And then, we go back and forth, but lowering stuff definitely, it's definitely cool.
So has the vinyl resurgence over the last 10 or 15 years played a role in maybe changing the conversation a little? Because I know for certain that dynamics back in the early days of vinyl were extremely important. And if you push it too hot, it could make the vinyl sound worse when the vinyl goes through the needle and goes through that process of playing a record. Have artists started to say, you know what? I know streaming is where the bulk, but we need to think vinyl here. Has that happened to you at all?
It has happened. It's happening more and more where people, the funny thing today is when people listen to vinyl, they go, oh, vinyl sounds so much better. It's the loud file cut onto the vinyl. So there's no more dynamics in it. But today, a few people are saying like, let's not use the loud streaming version. Let's lower that. Let's put something dynamic on vinyl and do that. Vinyl has a lot of physical restrictions electronically. Just it's one groove on a disc and it's constantly going. They're next to each other. The more amplitude they have, the more space it needs, the lower the level. There's all kinds of math involved. But people today are starting to listen to vinyl and say, hey, I wish we could do like a vinyl version. And I've done a bunch of vinyl albums for people in the last 3 or 4 years where they're like, you did my streaming, now let's start from scratch and do a vinyl version and, just give the vinyl cutting guy level that's good for vinyl, where he's not going to have to raise or lower stuff. It's going to go through the cutter head. There's not going to be any kind of problems. And the vinyl sounds cool. It's interesting. It's different. Like if you really have a good turntable, you'll notice it. Part of the other problem is that when you do vinyl today, when vinyl was the main source, everybody had a turntable and a system, and everybody knew how to maintain the turntable and the cartridge, and people kind of knew about the needle and all that stuff. Today, people either have like a $10,000 turntable or a $100 turntable.
Yes.
And the $100 turntable is plugged into your Sonos system or whatever. There's no like preamps, and people aren't really like, they're not really doing the analog turntable thing. They're doing a turntable with modern sound stuff. So there's kind of a disconnect in that sense of the modern turntable, but some artists are definitely going back to mastering for vinyl, and it's cool. There's some really cool, I did a 21 Pilots like live record 3 or 4 years ago where it was just for vinyl. There was no streaming thing. So all the level and everything is just set up for vinyl. And, it's for a live show, it's pretty good. It's pretty dynamic. So it's kind of cool.
By all means. Now, Neil Young spent a lot of time over the years campaigning for high quality audio in the digital space, dating back to the Pono player that he put his efforts into. And there's slowly but surely been adopting of this, such as Apple Music, Tidal, and Qobuz, maybe a few of the other streaming services, but it's not fully embraced by the music industry, even though 4K video is the industry standard in 5G. Why is there such a hyper focus on the visual side of things and even audio for video, such as Dolby Atmos mixes for movies and different television shows? But with music, it's been such a slow kind of let's see what happens transition.
I feel like, so it's of the four genres of entertainment, I feel like film and television run everything. They call the shots. Like Atmos came out of television, or film. It was like surround sound was around and, whatever, but as systems got better for television, Sonos and Bose and all these things, that was developed for television. It wasn't developed for music. They just kept trying to tie music into it because it's like, hey, we make speakers that play audio. Maybe the music industry could get on this. So Apple doing their thing with Atmos was kind of a cool move. We could have a 3-hour conversation about Atmos right now. I like it and I think it's cool, but I think it's a secondary thought right now. I think when people start focusing on Atmos, it will definitely get better and be much cooler. But I feel like film runs everything, the audio world, the music world, kind of like we navigate around that. Broadway and TV, like whatever that stuff, or not TV, but you know what I'm saying? Broadway, they're like at the bottom of decision making and entertainment, I feel like, but they're just doing Broadway. Nothing against Broadway people, don't come at me.
Of course.
But music, I feel like, is kind of like always getting the, like, hey, we have a good idea. Now, film's like, let's do it this way. And like, hey, we have another cool idea. No, television's like, no, do it this way, and then streaming services come in and they're like, hey, do it this way. So we're always being told what to do, and the record companies just kind of say, do that, this is good. Hey, we can do this. Let's change this. So we're always kind of changing and evolving and getting stuck in weird places. Like the formats in audio have changed so drastically and none of it's really clicked, and it's always been better, like DVD audio and, all this other stuff, mini disc. And it's like, film is like, hey, we're doing 4K, and everybody runs out and just gets 4K, whatever, like everybody jumps on it. And I feel like music has never really held the key. We kind of have, but never to get out of the pocket, if you understand that. Like we're just following film or television, and I don't know, I feel like it could really go somewhere if everybody really gets in it. The artists need to get in on it, on Atmos and all that stuff. And the artists really need to get in on vinyl and say, hey, I want to make really good vinyl, I mean, everybody does vinyl today, but I read this thing a couple months ago that, I don't know, 80% of vinyl is never opened. Like they never open the record, or it's never played. They look at the disc and they look at everything, but they've never played the record. They're just buying it as like this extra thing. Like, I mean, Taylor Swift, Olivia Rodrigo, all these big artists that print 4 different vinyls, purple vinyl, red vinyl, green vinyl, single vinyl, double vinyl. They do all that stuff. And the fans run out and buy it. And it's physical, so the artist gets the money. The streaming money, like we don't know, where that money goes or who gets it. No artists that I know are happy with that, unless you're Taylor Swift or Bad Bunny or, whatever. But I feel like the physical part is where artists are making money, and they should be behind that, make cassettes. Cassettes are coming back, like, I mean, weird things are happening. 45 records are coming back.
Well, as somebody who owns 4,600 CDs and counting, I have to ask, I always feel like, at least in the modern age, CDs have become kind of the redheaded stepchild of the formats. But there's something that I've always felt is very versatile about the format. However, CDs are only getting, in most cases, the brick-walled streaming mix. Tom Petty, we had talked about earlier, when he did the Mudcrutch album back in the 2000s, put a audiophile CD in with the vinyl, which I thought was really pushing those boundaries in what music can be delivered on CD. Do you see a world where moving forward, if people start to embrace sound quality and dynamics more, we might see CDs start to get a little bit more of a resurgence the way that vinyl and even cassettes have?
I think so. I think the next step is really going to be higher resolution audio, like Tidal going 24-bit. If I'm going to like listen to some other project, if it's just A being, I listen to it on Spotify. if I want to really hear a project and hear how it sounds, I listen to it on Tidal because I know I'm listening to the real highest resolution file if it's available on Tidal.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm a mastering engineer. I love that stuff. Does the average person know about it? I don't know. And I feel like today, I feel like Spotify runs the market, them or Apple,
Right.
and Spotify does 0.0 to better the platform. Zero. And if you Spotify, whatever, I don't know where they're going to go next. Apple, at least Apple's gone into like Atmos and,
Yes.
their high resolution files and stuff like that. Like they're trying, and Tidal's trying, and some other platforms are trying, but Spotify they're just sitting back and, whatever files you send in, we don't care. We're going to do our secret processing to them, and that's that. And nobody has any say or control over any of it. But you have to be on Spotify if you want to be a successful artist, I guess. I don't even know what, what I'm saying? Like I'm saying words and they don't really make sense, but they do make, like, it's the words you have to say. I don't know. I don't know what's next. I really hope high quality audio comes back. Like when CDs got really big, like they were making really good CD players with really good decoders
Yes.
and, really good transports, and, they're making really good CDs, like high-end CDs. And I felt like, damn, this is like, as a mastering engineer, you're like, yeah, good, really high-end stuff. There are people like me who listen to really good, they want to hear it really good. And now today, I don't even know. I don't know what the younger generation is is listening to, or what they care about.
Well, one thing I know the younger generation is definitely interested in, I think you can't talk about the future of mastering without bringing up AI in some aspect. What are your thoughts on AI? Or is it something that you use as a tool now, like you would any processor in the past? Is it something that you look down your nose at? Is it something that gives you concern? Do you think people are just going to start dropping their songs into AI and saying, master this for me?
So the Lander thing, when that came out, the first AI mastering tool, I put something through it, I listened to it, and I was not impressed. And, a bunch of the guys here were doing it too, like, hey, I put this song through, or some people would say, hey, I mastered this in Lander, but I need you to do your thing. And I would not listen to the Lander file until I was done mastering. And I swear, every single time I did it, I made it sound better. And it wasn't like just I said that. The client said it, the artist said it, whoever said it, everybody said it. AI years ago, so much. AI today, it's probably going to get better. It's probably going to shake the industry a little or do something. I don't think it's the end all, and I don't think it's going to replace people, because people still make music for people, where AI makes what people think they want. I don't know how to phrase that yet, but it could work. I've tried AI stuff. I never like the way it comes out. There's one plugin that I have, I won't say it, that they have an AI feature, and every time I've clicked on it just to see what it does, it puts the same 7 plugins on it in the same weird 7 kind of things. And I'm like, when I work, I use 2 plugins, maybe 3, and this used 7 every time. So I kind of feel it was like, just like overload of like, what would this guy do? What would this guy do? Maybe I would do this, maybe I would do that. And I feel like that's a lot of mastering today, is like, there's so much equipment available. Back in the day, you had a room with gear in it, analog gear, and you can only have so much gear in your room and in the mastering chain. So you learned how to EQ and, limit on one EQ and one limiter, or one compressor, or one de-esser. And today, like, you can put 20 plugins on one song. And I feel like that's kind of the mentality of the younger generation, because it's available. Like, oh, I'll put this on, and then I'll put this on, instead of listening to the audio and trying to get it in its purest form. I think AI at some point will be something. Hopefully not while I'm working. Hopefully I'll be like, oh, I read today AI is taking over, whatever. But it could be. I just feel like the human element is so special. Like, we keep trying to make fake people and fake everything, when we don't realize the beauty of one person's talent and how special that is. You know, like one singer like has so like back in the day, singers had to be singers. There was no vocal tuning. There was no whatever. You could only comp vocals so many times. So you really had to be a talented artist. You had to be a talented singer, talented musician, talented producer. And I feel like today, almost every celebrity has sung some record at some point, you know, or whatever, because we can go in and tune them and do whatever and make music for them. There's whatever it is, 1,900 submissions a day on Spotify. You know what I'm saying? Like back in the day, that wasn't there because of the human element. And I feel like AI is creating this, you know, just this stuff that it's big in numbers, but as far as like what it means to people and what's happening, it's not really happening. You know, if you get that, you know what I'm saying? Like,
100%.
I kind of still feel like we are, as humans, we make television so we can watch stuff and cry. We make movies. We do all this crazy shit that no other species does. You know, deer don't make movies. You know, zebras don't, you know, watch TV. You know, like we do all this crazy shit. We make fantasy. We make all this stuff to really push our emotions. And I feel like even though computers can put that stuff together, they can't do it in the way that we do it. We have crazy minds that work in crazy ways. You know, some of the greatest talent I've ever worked with are insane people. And until you can make AI insane, I don't think you're going to be able to like do that. We're a very special thing on this planet. You know, as far as art and music and film, it's very special.
That it is. And Chris, this has been an absolute pleasure. I thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
Thank you. It's been really fun.
And remember, to those listening, you could find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And finally, if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can find ad-free episodes of the show, gain early access to upcoming episodes, chime in on future topics, become a guest curator, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.